My name's Bernadine. I'm from the Dominican Republic, but I'm based currently in London. Um, and I run a company called Vastari that I've been running for more than 10 years now. It's a marketplace for exhibition content. So specifically, the main users are museums, private collectors, exhibition producers, sometimes artists as well, that basically are looking for venues for their exhibitions. And it was very popular pre-pandemic. In 2019, we matched $2 billion worth of content to venues, which has been growing more and more every time. And we've facilitated a lot of exhibitions going around the world, including to the top 10 museums, most visited museums in the world. But then, of course, when the pandemic happened, there was a huge shift in how exhibitions were seen and how they were being formulated. So in 2021, we set up a new organization, a subsidiary of Vastari called Vastari Labs, that is looking at how museums and Web3 kind of overlap. And the reason why is we've actually been looking at blockchain for a long time as something that could work well within the art and museums industry. We helped organize the Christie's Art and Tech Summit in 2018, which lots of people know about because of the Lost Robbies, which might have been mentioned at some point in your talks. Also, I'm helping with a big blockchain initiative called the Art Identification Standard, which is being incorporated in Monaco for the art world, and lots of different discussions about how distributed ledger technology can help the art market. And so this is I've been interested in it since 2015, before the term NFT existed, before anything. And if you look at how exhibitions have been evolving, our traditional exhibitions that we worked with were physical objects going to physical venues, right? So you'll have paintings, sculptures, artifacts like dinosaur bones going to a physical location somewhere in the world. And what Vastari facilitates is that you get more venues. So the exhibition about mummies goes from Turin in Italy to the United States and then to Europe, etc. And that was what our platform was facilitating most of all. Then since about 2017, 2018, we saw a shift where increasingly more and more digital content was coming to physical venues. So what that meant was you might have seen these immersive Vincent van Gogh exhibitions or Team Lab and Random International, who create works that are basically digital, but you experience them in a physical location. And what we've been exploring with Vastari Labs and what we've seen more and more is that there's also the digital content going to digital venues. And when you're talking about digital venues, it starts getting really abstracted because it's not just a building that's a museum or a gallery space or something like that. Digital venues could even be a Zoom meeting. It could be a Facebook page or Instagram. It can be an augmented reality filter, all kinds of things. So it starts getting really difficult, and there's we're still developing the vocabulary to explain digital exhibitions and digital content. And particularly also for digital artists, it's really interesting to think about what is the manifestation of your work and how should it be seen. Many original digital artists produce work just to be shown in a venue. And now increasingly they can produce work to be shown in a crypto wallet, but is that really the best way to show the work? Those are the types of questions we're asking ourselves. And of course, with the digital to digital, it's not just an image of a digital artwork shown in a 3D space, like a virtual reality gallery or something like that. It's also, as I mentioned, kind of putting it inside of a crypto wallet, and so logging the art on an NFT token and then showcasing it on a crypto wallet. We're still not seeing how to enjoy that art and whether the NFT itself is art. I think technically the jury's still out about that. Many people think that it's just the certificate of authenticity. There are so many different examples of how it's being used. So I don't think I need to go very far into what NFTs are with you guys, but obviously the most important thing that I think is interesting to think about is that you, within your personal crypto wallet, you own a certificate of a file that is saved somewhere on storage, right? So that is how NFT technology works. Does that work for exhibitions? Does that make sense for the existence of the artwork within the place where you want to see it? That's the big question to ask. And everyone, well, yeah, the NFT world boomed so much last year in terms of hype after that famous sale of the Beeple at Christie's. I'm sure that other speakers during your residency program so far have spoken about this work. The part that I find really interesting about it is the digital venue where these works were displayed for the past 13 years was a blog where one drawing was shown a day. Nowadays, people tend to show it within this collage format that Christie's created to put it into a single lot. But the buyer, for example, Medekovan said, I think it's really valuable because of the fact that it's this one drawing a day, and you have kind of a time stamping of that blog where every day there was a new drawing. And they wanted to put it within a museum, a virtual museum called B20, which is a really interesting concept because the NFT, the image within the NFT and what's being referenced is a completely different manifestation of exhibition compared to the works and how they have been shown in the past on this blog and how they may be shown in the future in three-dimensional space. So that's one of the conundrums, right, about NFTs and exhibitions is kind of how do you display them? How does the art want to be displayed? The ERC 721 token doesn't really say how this work should be displayed. It's not within the standards. There are now new standards being developed to be able to have more information about further aspects of the art and how the artist would like it to be shown. But it's not really clear. And then the other conundrum that I want to highlight is the concept of digitized versus digital art. And that is really important with a lot of the conversations we're having, for example, with museums, that you have this digitized artwork that then gets put into a digital wallet. So what we often got questioned when some of these NFTs started selling is, oh my gosh, we have loads of JPEGs. Does that mean that we have loads of money as museums and that we can now start getting all of the money thrown at us? And the truth is, there's a very big difference between if you're digitizing something versus if it's digital from the outset. So a lot of the works that are doing really well in the NFT space and that really have more meaning in the NFT space were made to be digital. They use technologies that would not be possible to be printed out or to exist somewhere else, and you need to have them on an NFT to sell them. But there are also works where maybe it's a scan of an artwork, could be a 2D scan, a 3D scan, and then kind of what is the meaning of that? And so I'm going to run through a few case studies of museums and NFTs to kind of highlight how that has been happening in the museum space, and then we can maybe open it up to discussions. So I don't know if any of you know about the Global Art Museum. What they did in 2021 was named an art heist in the kind of news at the time. They are an organization from Singapore. And what they did was they took images that were in the open domain. So can everyone still hear me? I just heard a little noise. All good?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, okay. And also, if you do want to interrupt and ask questions, I'm realizing I'm speeding through this. So if you want to stop, then just do say something. But anyway, so in March, this organization from Singapore took works from the open domain. So when artworks have existed for more than 70 years after an artist's death, in some jurisdictions, it's different in different countries, the copyright expires. So it means that anyone could copy that image. And so technically what they did wasn't illegal, but it just didn't make sense. What they did was they minted works that are in the Art Institute of Chicago and the Rijksmuseum, etc., and started saying that they were going to sell NFTs of these works and any revenue would be shared with the museum. But they hadn't checked with the museum beforehand. So the museums afterwards said, we do not have a partnership with any of these parties. We have an open data policy. So it's kind of like taking open source software and selling it and then saying, oh, but we will share the revenue with the producer of the open source software. It just doesn't make sense. So the truth is they didn't really sell these works, but what it did back in March was it showed to people that what you're buying in an NFT is not just the JPEG. You're buying the legitimacy of that JPEG. You're buying the legitimacy of that work coming from the producer of the work who says, I'd like to do that. And Seurat is not around today to say that he's happy for you to mint a work of his famous painting in the Art Institute of Chicago. So it's not very authentic. But if technically the Art Institute of Chicago minted it, who's technically the owner, maybe it's slightly more authentic. So they said it was an experiment, and they said that they punked the world. I don't know if that's true, but they basically said that they were showing what NFTs are and trying to show people what is possible. There are other examples of how museums are doing NFTs. There's been a huge headline recently from Italy of the Uffizi Museum that's been minting NFTs of their collection. And this is different, right? Because it's actually the Uffizi or the Pinacoteca, I think it was Pinacoteca de Brera or other museums in Italy, taking works from their collection and minting them officially. But additional to the official minting, what they actually did is they created physical replicas of the digital art of the physical artworks at the exact same scale of the original work. So this is like a TV screen with the artwork in the same size as the original artwork. So when you read the headlines that an NFT from the Uffizi sold for 120 or whatever thousand euros, it's actually that they bought the TV screen with the frame that they're allowed to show in their home, plus the NFT of the work. So it's kind of the NFT is the verification that the digital manifestation of this, that the fact that you're showing this work is authorized by the museum. It's an official copy. So if you want to think about it, if you print images of works in the physical world, it's kind of like postcards if you're just printing them with no authorization. Those postcards are worth maybe a little bit more if they're officially made by the museum. And then you can have kind of more like official replicas that are like posters or bigger manifestations like this one, where it's kind of still like a official copy. And this is not something new for museums. So if you think about, for example, the Musée Rodin of the sculptor from the 19th century, they still cast posthumous, so after death, casts of bronzes by Rodin. So, for example, the very famous The Kiss or The Thinker, they sometimes create these casts still now, after his death, to raise money for the museum. What they do to make it clear that it's not the original from in the lifetime of the artist is that they clearly hallmark it, like have a bronze mark about the date that it was made, but also they do it at a different scale. So you might have a kiss that is 10 centimeters high or a kiss that is 90 centimeters high. And those are all from different years when the Musée Rodin did a replica of the kiss. And so I kind of correlate this NFT behavior similar to what the Musée Rodin did. It's fundraising for museums, which is very important at the moment because they've suffered a lot through the pandemic, but it's not really an original work that is being produced. And by comparison, the Hermitage also minted NFTs of their collection. And they got around the kind of idea of it not being a postcard per se by limiting the edition. So it was only 2 copies, one of which was staying in the museum and one of which was for sale. They did it on the Binance Smart Chain platform. And the director of the museum even signed the image in the bottom right, as you can see here, to kind of show that this was a digital image that was minted at a specific time by that director as a different thing to the original work. So it kind of makes it more clear to the buyer as well that this is not, you're not buying 50% of the original work, you're not buying anything to do with the original, you're buying the digital version of the original work by the Hermitage. And at Vastari Labs, we were also involved with a project with the museum back in July. We actually did it on the Tezos platform on Hic Nunc, which is some of you might have heard about in the talks. We worked with a work by William Blake from the Whitworth Museum in Manchester, and this image is actually not the original work. It's a multispectral image of the work that's really high resolution, kind of like medical scan of the work. And the museum decided to sell that to raise funds for their community fund. So the concept of it was to get some of the wealth of the collection. So this is one of the most famous pieces in the collection of the museum, to raise funds for the communities around the museum, because it's based in a neighborhood of Manchester where a lot of people are disadvantaged, etc. So it was kind of a whole project. And the interesting thing about this one is that it's going to be included in an exhibition in 2023. So in the summer of 2023, the Whitworth is having an exhibition called Economics, the Blockbuster, where they're going to analyze what happened with this edition of NFTs that came from the Whitworth. So it's going to be like a 2-year ongoing project. And then, that's another screenshot. So we had it originally on Hic Nunc, and as you might know, there was a huge controversy with Hic Nunc in November, and so usually, if we had listed it on a Web 2 platform, the project would have had a big problem because of the fact that the marketplace was discontinued. But because of the fact that we used Web 3 technology, the remaining NFTs that were still available for sale were still in the Whitworth wallet, and they could then sell them on another platform, in this case, object.com, and they just re-swapped them, which is quite good. So anyway, as I mentioned, the original work is a hand-colored print by Blake that supposedly was done on his deathbed, and the image on the right is the NFT, which was a multispectral image that the universities. So the Whitworth is part of the University of Manchester, and they were doing research into the dating of the work and what whether that myth that it was created on Blake's deathbed is true. And that research is also still being developed and will be published in the coming years. So then we have another example that has just come about from the British Museum, also related to an exhibition they were showing at the time. So they created limited edition works to be to be sold at the same time as the exhibition. And they actually even put a temporary pop-up shop inside of the museum where you could buy these NFTs of, for example, the Wave, all of these famous Hokusai works. The interesting thing was they went for different edition sizes. So if you can see on this screenshot, this one is 10 editions and they call it super rare. There were some that were 10,000 editions of 10,000 that were more, and they were selling these to benefit the museum. The museum has continued to create more and more of these types of NFTs, now also for some things in their permanent collection. But I guess my question about this phenomenon is a little bit going back to what is the meaning of owning this NFT for the collector who buys it. I think that there is a certain element of having something in your crypto wallet that shows off that you care about culture, you like Hokusai, you maybe went to the exhibition and so you buy it. So there's maybe some meaning to the NFT. But I sometimes wonder if, because there's not so much of a difference between the original Hokusai print that was scanned for this NFT versus the NFT itself, that potentially people might think that they're buying a share in the artwork, and that is why the value is so high that it's achieving. Because with a postcard, you would never pay $400 for a postcard that's one of 10,000. So why would you pay $400 for a postcard online. And that's one of the things that only time will tell, if the economics of that will work and whether it's just a temporary way of working. And then another example that's super interesting and early, and a lot of people don't know about, is that the National Museums Liverpool minted NFTs back in 2018 for in a project with an academic called Francis Little. They chose a group of people to come into the museum and choose an object from the museum that they would mint. But instead of the metadata being the information that the museum wanted to say about it, the metadata would be their own interpretation of the object. So they could choose why they're connected to it and what they think about that artwork and mint an NFT with their own inscription. So it's slightly different. And similarly, recently, the Belvedere in Vienna did a similar thing for Valentine's Day, where they separated the kiss by Klimt into 10,000 pieces, and people can buy one of the pieces and inscribe it with the name of the person they love or a love message, etc. So it's kind of this concept that you're buying an NFT that has metadata as well as a digital asset. So could you play with the metadata as the thing that you're buying or that you're keeping in your crypto wallet? And so what I guess my conclusion from all of this stuff is that so much more is possible in the digital to digital space than what has been done so far. If people start rethinking what they think of as digital venues, think more about what is the meaning of having this NFT in the wallet, and what is the space where the art is going to be shown and how is it going to be shown. So there still is so much left to be defined, and it's just a really exciting time to be working in this space. So that's kind of my intro to this. Let me just stop sharing my screen. I need to figure out how to get out of here. Here we go. So I'm super open to hearing your thoughts and to hearing your questions about what I just shared. And also, I assumed a lot of things that you've already heard about, but if there's any of them that I mentioned that you haven't heard about, then feel free to tell me as well.
Hi,
Hello,
Bernadine.
Sorry, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi, this is Anna. Good morning. Thank you so much for that. I guess I wanted to ask you an overarching question, which is, does the ownership of a piece equal the right to mint? Like, if a museum owns, quote unquote, the artwork, do they have a right to mint, especially in the case of living artists?
So definitely not in the case of living artists. And there are no examples of museums doing that without the permission of the artist. And in general, the copyright laws still apply. So the normal copyright laws apply, where even if I buy a painting from you as an artist, I'm not allowed to print t-shirts and sell those around. The copyright still sits with you as an artist. And that's the same situation in NFTs. So that's why they've been focusing on works that are in the open domain or that are out of copyright now.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Claudia. I also wanted to echo and just say thank you so much for that presentation. It's come at a really interesting time for me. There's a project in the space that launched recently with the platform called Fellowship, and it was the August Sander estate collection, and it's like 10,000 images that just recently got minted. And it was a partnership with Fellowship and the August Sander estate. So although the photographer is no longer alive, the estate basically collaborated with Fellowship and said, yeah, sure, let's mint all of these works. And I guess my question is, like, I'm just looking through the collection in OpenSea right now, and in the metadata, you can sort the artworks by what institutions and museums they're held in. So some of these works are in the Museum of Modern Art, some of them are in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And so I'm kind of sitting here wondering, like, what do the museums think of this, right? Because I assume the estate was just good to mint these with Fellowship because the estate holds the ownership. But I guess my question is, like, do you ever wonder if the museums are looking at this in the space right now, thinking like, oh shit, for lack of a better word, should we hop on board and collaborate, or, should we just let this go?
I think that's a really good point. And so the estate is completely allowed to do it, because as long as the artist died less than 70 years ago, maybe 80 years in some countries, the estate owns the copyright of those images, right? And so they are allowed to do whatever they want. But it's been a problem within museums for a long time, because, for example, if you look at a lot of these immersive Van Gogh's exhibitions that have been put together, that's not in collaboration with the museums who own the images, who own the actual original paintings. They use the high resolution scans that the museums are creating in the interest of education and of furthering the knowledge of art history around the world. They take those images that are open source and create experiences using it, right? And museums didn't really care at first, because whatever, but then as soon as they saw that they were making so much money from it, they felt a little bit more like, this is not really the idea. And I think that often happens with copyright issues. It's like, if you do it and there's like not that much of an impact, it's people let it slide, because it probably costs more to go after the person who did anything compared to the value of what has been done. But if it starts getting really like making a lot of money, people start feeling uncomfortable. And that type of, I suspect and I foresee that there will be changes in the laws relating to digital use of images of physical objects over time. But it's also per country, right? So if you look at taking a high resolution photo of a work, if I have a Picasso and someone takes a high resolution photograph of that Picasso, if you're in the US, if it's a photograph that basically is the image of the Picasso with no artistic interpretation of it, but like a catalog image, the photographer who took the photo has no copyright over that image, because of the fact that it's just representing the original image. But in Europe and in the UK, that photographer does own the copyright to that image. So I know, for example, photographers who've been taking photographs on behalf of the art market for a very long time and didn't have agreements signed with the people who gave the artworks to be photographed. So basically, they own the copyright of all of those images. And up to now, no one really cared. But if you start thinking about NFT minting, that becomes really valuable and problematic. So I think that there will be progress in the way that this is handled legally going forward. But for the time being, the estate was completely right to do it. And the museums are probably just frustrated, but they can't do anything about it.
Yeah, thanks for that.
No problem.
I was actually curious if this topic has been brought up in matters of like discussion or maybe like in the circles like that you sort of like talk into, and it's like how are museums going to deal with essentially like trying to NFT, like for example stolen art and stuff that has been acquired through, now that we know, non-legal means, right? Because I mean, I've gone to a lot of museums here in Canada that will like flat out say these have been acquired through illegal means, but then proceed to flat out do nothing about it, not help any of the countries that they took that from. And then it seems like this space and like some of the images that you had shared, that this is like a really easy way for these museums to sort of separate themselves from the history and just sort of be like, well, here's a little print of it, like you can own this little print of it. How has that been brought up? Has that been like a topic of discussion at all?
That's been brought up quite a bit. There's, for example, an organization called Bronze DAO that is looking at the Benin bronzes that are from Nigeria, that were, as you said, illegally taken from Nigeria by people quite a few years ago, that they're trying to buy bronzes and acquire them back for the museums in Nigeria and get them back to where they rightfully belong. But I think it's a bigger question that is very difficult to answer, which is about kind of preservation and the investment it takes to keep objects, and kind of how you think about that, because a lot of the arguments for museums keeping objects is that they say, look, we've invested all of this time to keep it safe, so we have a right to keep it, that type of thing. And if we hadn't, then the object would be destroyed, or the object would be in someone's private home and not available to the wider public, etc. So that's kind of the counter argument. And before, there was also an argument that's kind of so backwards, saying that the facilities in Europe and Canada and the US are better than anywhere else, so that's why they should stay somewhere where they're kept in the right conditions. I think that argument is kind of gone now, because the museums, I mean, the quality of museums that are in other places is really high. So I think there might be something with this concept of a digital twin and ownership of the digital twin representing ownership of the object in the future. But as you said, you need it, like, there still is a lot of value to the original object, right? If it was a digital first object, it's fine, but not a physical object.
Like, I only asked because, like, I was scrolling through Christie's a couple back, and they had an antiquities auction where a couple of ancient Egyptian stuff had sold, and I was and then going through some of the pictures, it's like it would be easy, and I've seen it enough in museums, at least in Canada, for like a museum to release a multi-edition that's, of a higher rarity, and then go through the route of, oh well, here is the chance, for people who we stole this from to own a part of the work, but in fact it's not, the actual ownership of the work, right?
Yeah, so this whole subject is called restitution, and there are a lot of people talking about restitution at the moment. Where should these objects be? Who is the rightful owner? All these types of questions. And I think museums are going through a bit of crisis themselves of like, what's our point? What are we doing this for? It's a bit complicated. I think that just to note with the ancient artifacts, the only way that they can be sold as somewhere like Sotheby's or Christie's, etc., is if there is proof that they were taken from the country and owned before 1971. The United Nations created kind of like this rule that if there is proof that the object had already left Egypt or wherever it is before 1971, you're allowed to sell it. So
Sorry,
with the museum
who made the rule?
the United Nations, yeah. So this was to stop people digging things out of the ground today and trying to sell them on the market, because if you did that today, there would be no documentation that that it already existed before 1971, and so it's helped a little bit with the regulation of the antiquities market. The question I would have is sometimes museum objects don't have a lot of information about where they came from, etc. But probably most of them would have records before 1971. Anyway, one of the things that I often think about is museums never sell stuff from their collection. It's called De-Accession, and they try to avoid that at all costs because their whole point is keeping stuff, and De-Accession is seen as unethical unless they can really justify it. They have to build a case and say, we're going to sell this because of XYZ and that type of thing. But what you're describing, in my mind, is kind of like digital de-accession. And there are no rules yet about what is digital de-accession. Are you allowed to sell shares in the work of art? Is the British Museum technically selling shares in their work by selling these multi-edition works at La Collection? That hasn't really been defined.
Thank you.
Lots of things there that I didn't expect we would go down. But yeah, it's all interesting and it's stuff to think about a lot.
Hi,
so for you guys,
in Brazil, they are trying to do something very similar with this, and I don't know exactly what to say to them because they are trying to contact me for this. And what do you suggest?
Can you repeat that? I didn't hear it so well.
Okay. So here in Brazil, they are trying to do something similar to this in here in some museums in Brazil, and they are trying to talk to me about it, and I really don't know what to say to them. So I'm very surprised to talk to about this today, and I really want to know your opinion about it and what you suggest.
Yeah, I tried to be quite neutral in my presentation and not say my opinion, but I give my opinion. I don't think it makes sense until you define what the digital twin is and what the meaning is of that digital version of the work of art. I don't think it makes sense to sell copies of that work in on OpenSea, for example, or on a marketplace. What I think makes more sense is if you have digital assets within the museum that have never been seen before or that have never been able to be sold, that you can then create into NFTs in a more interesting way. So if you have, they sometimes produce videos or audio or who knows, for different exhibitions, things that are only here for a short period of time and then disappear, and that you can preserve them and people can own those. I think that makes more sense for museums than the concept of digitizing JPEGs from their collection. Personally, I think so.
Yes, that makes so much sense. Thank you.
No problem. But sometimes it could mean that you do use the JPEG of the collection, but like with the National Museums Liverpool, what they did, they made the metadata something different that made that JPEG mean something different. So it's got a different value than just being an image of the work, the physical work.
Sure. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Bernadine, I was really interested by what you just said, that museums have to define what it means to have a physical work of art become digital. And you touched upon that a little bit with the Liverpool example. But are there other examples of how turning something from the physical to the digital like evolves or enhances the meaning of the piece?
Yeah, completely. And if you think about it, right? Some museums in their inventory management system, so like when they're looking at all of the digital assets that they own and all of the assets that they own, they separate the photograph of the object from the object itself inside of their inventory system of all of the objects that they have in their collection. But most museums, they think of the image of the object as synonymous with the object itself. They do not inventorize that photograph as a separate object. And it is a separate object. These photographs become out of date. They need to get, how do you say that? They need to get actualized with better pixels, with, we're soon going to be LiDAR scanning everything. So you're really selling a certain resolution, a certain quality of image that is possible in 2022. And over time, in 50 years' time, that image is going to look vintage. So I think that a lot of the approaches so far have kind of been more like the image is synonymous with the physical object. And that doesn't make sense. So I think the first step is to kind of start having more of a process about what is this image? What does it mean? Do we think of it just as a proxy for the original object, or do we think of it as an image itself? And then how do we think of that as something to be minted? And what does that actually mean? And what metadata would we put onto that image to be able to sell it? And that is the kind of stuff that's really interesting. So what for example the Hermitage did with the signature of the director on the image is kind of thoughtful, because they have thought like, this is today, the director of the museum is this guy right now. We decided to mint it, so we're taking ownership of that fact, and whoever owns this NFT owns a JPEG from that date with the signature of the museum director, who was taking a risk in being one of the first museums to do an NFT of their collection. But it's gonna age over time. It's not something that's gonna look high res forever. So you need to think about, what is this NFT going to mean to us in 50 years' time when technology has evolved? And the other part that's quite interesting, if you think about the usage of NFTs, like we haven't started using them that much, but everyone's talking about the metaverse, right? So if we're going to be putting together exhibitions of the NFTs we own and putting them into 3D spaces or taking them with us into games and that type of stuff, I wonder if the museums have thought about, like, what are they happy for people to do with their NFTs and what are they not happy to do with people? So when I talk to museums, I sometimes tell them, like, look, what if someone buys your NFT of the Mona Lisa and decides to hang it from a ceiling in VR dripping in blood? Are you comfortable with that? Definitely with the original Mona Lisa, you're not happy with that. So how do you feel about that in a digital space? And that is possible because you're selling NFTs of them. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. And we don't have any definitions yet of fair use and usage of things that you buy.
Thank you. I guess it's also really stressful for museums to think that this technology can change so much. I mean, I'm sure they're all just kind of watching and holding their breath to see.
Yeah, they're not the fastest moving. They're probably watching all of you guys and seeing how you're doing it and then deciding what they want to do. And I think many of them are holding tight until they can see what's the right thing to do. And I guess that one of the questions I wanted to ask all of you was, have you thought about, with your art and the NFTs that you're producing and what you want to be producing, whether there are limitations of how you want people who buy your NFT to use the artwork and to take it into the metaverse, however that might look in the future?
I would say, like, funny enough, because of my experience with museums and the white space, I'm not concerned with how people use my artwork in the metaverse at all in that sense. Because it's like, I've seen enough limitations happen either like physically or with like subject matter or with whatever, that to me it's like, if the copyright is already established and everybody knows what they own, you can I mean, to me personally, like, you can do what you want, right? I understand sort of the optics of a museum worrying about their NFTs being displayed, with dripping blood and like certain imagery, but it's sort of like my response to it has been like the exact opposite, and like almost in response to like the white space, but like an exact opposite response in sense.
Is there anything that someone could do with your art that you would get pissed off?
Oh, like, yeah, oh, absolutely. They can. I've seen they can like mess with it. They can probably like put on top of it like pretty heinous stuff, appropriate it in ways that I don't enjoy. But it's like, the way I operate at it is like, I have a seat at the table now, so it's like I'm good with my seat. I get to speak, you know. Like, if anybody wants to like tarnish it, let them tarnish it. Like, I mean, like, I'm talking from personal experience where I've seen my culture, like ancient Egyptian culture, get tarnished, throughout history. So it's like, I'm
Yeah,
here
that's
building
actually
my
true.
own.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I know an ancient Egyptian artifact collector who was living in Egypt at the time, and he's from like German royalty. And I'm not a big fan of people who buy things of this type, but some of the most amazing stories came from him. And the way that they were selling things on the side of the road because they weren't aware of the importance of these artifacts. And he felt that he had to buy them to save them. This is how he describes it at the time. And one of the pieces that he bought was a papyrus scroll that was still rolled up from ancient Egyptian times. And no one had dared to open it or do anything with it. And he paid for professionals to open it and put it straight so that people could read the scroll and everything. And it was one of the most important discoveries because it's one of the earliest documents showing a resurrection, which, if that already was being portrayed in ancient Egyptian times, it's quite significant to kind of Judeo-Christianity and all of that. But the most interesting part of his story was actually that when he was unrolling this papyrus, he said the one thing that, like, we filmed it, we photographed it, we did everything to document it as well as possible, because this was the only time it was going to get opened ever. But there was one aspect of the opening that you couldn't capture, and that he regrets forever that no one else will be able to get this. And that was the smell, actually. The smell of opening a scroll from like thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, having the smell of ancient Egypt. And you can't put that in an NFT either. So that's kind of impossible. Yeah.
You can't, and it's like I through my like studies like in university, I realized like the whole like conversation with like museums isn't like, we tried, artists make it seem like it's a black and white conversation, but it's really not, because he is right. If you look at pictures of ancient Egypt, you'll literally see Egyptian families made livings off of essentially grave robbery. You know, grave robberies have been happening in have been happening since ancient Egyptian times. So it's like, it's one of those conversations where it's like, it sort of comes down to where it's like, I mean, the way I view it is like, if the white space has made so much money off of it, why hasn't some of that money made its way back? Right? Instead of we're gonna play the game of return the stuff back, why not share the funds back? You know?
Well, that's the interesting thing about DAOs, right? Because if you can start structuring ways in which you can have the payments going to the rightful people in the right proportions automated, it would be fantastic. But I don't know well, definitely the technology is not there yet. But also just getting people to wrap their heads around this concept is going to take a very long time. Because even the concept of NFTs, museums are still confused about. Like, I still every day get people saying what I was saying earlier about, oh my gosh, we're sitting on millions of dollars because we have lots of JPEGs. And it's still people not understanding what this is. So yeah, it's going to take time for people to understand what distributed ledger technology can do for the industry. Yeah. And so in terms of going back to this concept of exhibiting your art, I mean, we've seen some pretty bad examples of exhibiting digital art in the physical world, where it's just put on a Samsung TV screen without any concept or care about it, etc. So do you think that is something that artists will want to start including in their metadata, or do you not really care and expect people to just talk to you and tell you ask you what you want, what they want, how you would want it to be shown?
I would hope that would be a conversation between the curator and the artist. Like, I don't think I would ever put like installation or like exhibition instructions in the metadata of my work, because it's always evolving, and installation is always evolving, and technology is too. And right now, I love how you bring up like the Samsung TV screens, because as cool as those are, I feel like they're incredibly limiting, like not even just in terms of like aspect ratio and size, but I would like to see kind of more interactivity of digital art in these spaces, like those Van Gogh exhibitions you were talking about earlier. Can we do projection mapping with their NFTs? Like, how can we create something in the physical world with these digital artworks that we wouldn't be able to create if these artworks were just mainly physical objects? And so I think that the curator, though, would have to be pretty open to that discussion. And especially understanding that since these artworks are so digitally native, there's much more possibility of different installation options.
Exactly that. And if you think about it, like we've set a standard with paintings of how they should be displayed, right? They're framed, they're at least older paintings, right? They're framed. You have a certain distance from the floor. That's the standard in a museum setting. You have a certain distance that people are allowed to get close to it, that you have where the caption goes next to the painting on the wall. And kind of there's a certain standard that even if you can't speak to the artist, it's kind of acceptable. But I feel that with digital, we haven't gotten to any type of standard yet, or because it is so different, as you said, like everything can be customized.
Completely. And just to add on to that quickly, I'm just thinking of like the standards that we see in the traditional fine art space, like museums, and just thinking of kind of like the ethos of crypto art being much more like underground feeling, and like why do we have to take our art on the blockchain and like basically follow those standards in those institutions that we're trying to get away from. So I think that's just an interesting play there, and that dynamic I think you could do some cool things with.
But another counter argument is that are standards being created by the marketplaces, right? Your art looks in a very specific way when it's sold on OpenSea or on any of these marketplaces. They put it on the website in a kind of standard way. And sometimes it's standard square even, or something like that. And you kind of go, what? This is not what I imagined for my art. So there are, the equivalent of the white cube is happening online on these websites. And artists need to be aware of it and need to get into the conversation to say how they want it to be shown.
Yes, that is true, which is why I advocate for exploring options to exhibit your work in this space. That's not just following the steps of the platform, because platforms can evolve and change as well. So like if that's creating a separate website where you have control of how your NFTs are curated, then that's probably the way to go, in my mind.
I'm just gonna throw this out there. I recommend those who have a good computer or a PlayStation to download the Radiohead Exhibition on and experience the thing, because it's like the perfect combination of what you guys are talking about, of like audio, visual, like projection mapping, digital VR stuff. Well, I don't know if you can do it in VR, but it's like metaverse. I call it metaverse on crack because they had funding from Epic Games, unlike, you know, Decentraland polygons and weird trash cans. But yeah.
It's like the new kind of immersive experience.
Well, like they tied it to it's like one of those like visual experience that, like how artists would be like, man, I wish you could feel like music and vibrations with the painting, and it's like that sort of thing. And you can do it with digital means because you're not tied by limitation or energy power like you would be in like the white space, right? And so it's like, and we've seen like how not to do it also in the metaverse when you look at certain exhibitions, like you said, like the white cube like has replicated itself in the metaverse. And like the biggest example of that is like some of the exhibition spaces like you'll see in Decentraland, where it's like an exact copy of like what you would see in real life. And people have gone as far as to include like useless stuff like benches and trash cans that you can't even interact with for like the sake of realism.
Yeah, I love that type of thing. Thinking about what the buildings are and why do they have air vents and air conditioning and that type of thing. Anna makes a really good point that when you see collectors put your art on a screen at home, it makes you really happy. And I think that I really love it too. I collect a lot of art and I now use it as my Zoom background. When I go on to talks, I use it as my, like the background on my TV if I don't have anything on TV, that kind of stuff. And it makes me so happy. But I have had conversations with artists before in the past where I was doing an example exhibition, for example, and I was putting some artworks in a white cube as a demonstration. And one of the artists, he basically said to me, I don't want my work to be seen like that. I don't want my work to be shown on a white wall as a JPEG kind of put on there. It takes away from my work and I don't like it being done like that. So I just think that there will be more and more feelings of frustration with that. And with what the museums call new media art or digital art in the like pre-NFT world, there were very clear standards about how you document and how you exhibit. And almost like the physical was the most important thing for the museum to understand, like how do you want this Bill Viola work to be shown or whatever it might be. And now that needs to expand into all of the digital permutations of usage and everything, which is it's really complicated. Like, what if an artist doesn't like me using one of their artworks as the Zoom background? Am I allowed to? It's all these questions that kind of haven't been really set, and it's not all legal. It's also just like moral. What do people feel comfortable with, and where does that line get crossed? I think that still needs to be defined.
Hi, Ines here. I was just thinking about that point of tarnishing the artwork in terms of how it's displayed. I just, maybe it's very naive or hopeful of me to think so, but I don't see how, putting somebody's artwork with like a piece of shit next to it would serve the collector at all, because it's also in their interest to uphold the value of the work as well as the artist. And I think that tarnishing the actual piece that you have created is happening already in Web 2. It's so prominent. At least with my art, I work with my own body, and I can't tell you how many times the color grading I spent 3 days creating, has been overtaken by an Instagram filter, so it fits better into somebody else's feed. And honestly, I don't even care that much about how it's displayed as long as they don't touch the actual art. And that's one of the reasons I got so invested into NFTs, was because I can somehow preserve that little piece that I created one day.
That makes so much sense. It's totally true. And filters are, and they impact the work, right? And actually, that's another thing with the photographs that are taken of physical works of art. The image matching is getting much better now, but it used to be pretty rubbish. And I originally trained as an art historian, and you have decades worth of art historical research that was done based on photographs that were black and white. And these academics drawing conclusions about the artwork and about the artist based on a black and white reference image rather than the original. And they really, sometimes you can read things that just, are not true because you can now see the color photograph of the work. So yeah, it's, and unfortunately, a lot of times Instagram and those types of social media places is where your images live, where people interact with them and that type of thing, and they might not get the record of how you want it to be shown. So really good point, Ines.
Thank you so much. I'm actually really interested in copyright. It was my favorite topic at university way before I got into NFTs. And actually, this is when I learned that you are not allowed to take photographs of paintings, not because you could destroy them, but because you could just hold copyright, at least in here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, they kind of pretend that it's because of the conservation, but it's actually because of millions on copyright images. Licensing the images to China and other places.
Yeah, exactly. And then having it on purses or, I don't know, mugs.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the interesting thing too, right? All of these producers of NFTs from the early time. So if you look at the Bored Ape Yacht Club and the CryptoPunks and Larva Labs and a few of the other ones, they're starting to sign deals with licensing agents to produce products. So you might own a CryptoPunk, but then that CryptoPunk or similar could be used in an advertising campaign or something because you don't own the copyright to that. So it's kind of weird if that CryptoPunk is your online identity, but someone else can use it. So yeah, I think there are still a lot of questions to be answered.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. Yeah. I mean, one of the first things I checked when I was invited to Super Rare was actually checking who owns the copyright, because I would never give my copyright away. And I don't care about smart contracts and licensing. I would just not do it. Maybe you can tell I'm a control freak. So I kind of wanted to preserve my images the way they were meant to look. And I don't really see the excitement of variations and putting filters over my work. It's supposed to be how I intended it,
Yeah, and actually speaking of copyright and Instagram, I mean, the other thing that like my main when I get really old school people saying they don't understand why this NFT stuff works and all this type of stuff, I think one of the points I make is like, look, the Web 2 technology, there was no way that a thing like Facebook or Instagram could exist, because copyright law would have been a nightmare, right? Like, you're posting images and they are technically posting it for you. You could say that you're not allowed to post it in a specific jurisdiction or whatever. So what technically happens when you post an image on these social media platforms is you assign the copyright license to Facebook and Instagram for that image, and they show it to you as the copyright holder. And that was the only way for it to work in Web 2, because otherwise they would have gotten so many lawsuits of problems. So, but my question to you, Inez, is actually, did you, given you're obsessed with copyright, did you ever like stop people from posting things on Instagram and Facebook because of that?
I'm not the kind of person that will call the police if somebody, has it on their profile picture. I honestly, I find it actually very flattering, it's very kind, especially when they give credit to the name. But because, I say because of the quality of my work, in a sense that it's very feminist, and I work with my own body, and I appeal to people to respect the female body and our governance. The same kind of approach extends to my imagery. And when people take it out of context and use it to promote their own agendas, their own businesses, like oftentimes for some bizarre reason, like plastic surgeons using my body as an advertisement, I find it beyond offensive, as well as psychiatric offices. That's the point where I draw the line and I actually speak up. And yeah, I'll be there with my little whip.
Makes sense. No, and I think, what I think is nice is what you said at the beginning, that with NFTs, we kind of have what is the originating wallet, and who is that, so that we can then look at like, okay, maybe we can contact this person and ask them about it, because finding out copyright information is quite difficult. But if it's standardized, if it's done in the right way, NFTs could help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the hope I have, that we'll also have a different way of looking at digital authorship and ownership, because we as artists really did help building Web 2 and kind of navigating that traffic to those sites. And now we're kind of left out, it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, totally. I just love how many people in Web 3 were actually like other jobs in Web 2 and secretly had so much skill and talent, and now we can support them to produce their digital art. That to me is so inspiring.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? People feeling differently about their art and how they see it?
I wanted to ask, like, have museums looked at NFTs in like a conservation standpoint for like certain paintings or works that are essentially becoming irreparable or like damaged beyond repair, and looking at that tech to like preserve it for like essentially instead of like letting it get destroyed?
Well, the truth is they already digitize works for that reason, right? They'll like do an ultra high resolution scan at like higher resolution than the eye can see of an object to be able to preserve it. What the NFT does is preserve the hosting of that information, right? Because it's distributed over IPFS or whatever. And if you had a talk with Club NFT, or maybe you will do in the future, you'll know that even that is not necessarily that it's preserved for the future. So a lot of these museums still have a Web 1 approach to hosting this data, which is that they use local servers to keep the high resolution files of things that they preserve and they see themselves as the custodians of those files. So they wouldn't even use cloud services because they're worried about whether that maintains it, whether that saves it well, etc. So they use their own servers. So I don't know if they would jump to doing Web3, because Web3 is basically believing that the peer-to-peer will last longer than Web2 or Web 1.
But because isn't there like a worry that all these sort of centralized like gatherings oh, just this photos, if something happens to the internal servers, then it's gone. I would have assumed that maybe like even just like online servers would have been like a solution already implemented in museums and like cloud services. I didn't know they were still like in internal. Okay, that's
Yeah,
wild.
they're old school. They're proper old school. Like using cloud computing within museums is like a big deal, and they still need to be convinced of why that is useful. And so then Web3 is kind of yet another step.
That's crazy. Okay, wow, wow.
Yeah, I guess it's that approach that still thinks that stashing money under your bed is going to be a good backup. There's still a lot of people who think that, right? Like, and there are many different reasons why. So, yeah. Cool. I think, does it sound like there aren't any more questions? Feel free to speak up if you do have some. Cool. I think that's probably a good point to wrap up on. Stash money under your bed. No, I guess the correlation is with cryptocurrency, right? People felt a bit nervous about all these banking systems, whether they could trust it, and crypto came about to kind of be a counter to that. But if you're still stashing your money under your bed, you probably don't jump to crypto straight away because you don't have that risk of the of the centralized servers from the cloud computing, etc. So anyway, I really appreciate being here today. I'm super accessible on Twitter. It's the same handle as what I'm using on Discord. And if you have any more questions you wanted to ask or things that you wanted to talk about, I'm always available. And I hope that you have an amazing program. It sounds like there are so many great things, and vertical crypto art is really a wonderful initiative. So, and congrats to all of you for being the third cohort.
Thank you so much, Bernardine. It's been a great session. It was so inspiring, and I'm sure that will be a lot of food for thoughts from this conversation. Thank you so much for being here at VCA again. And yeah, have a nice one.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.